Procell. Procell leads collaborative efforts to strengthen prevention, reentry, and public safety across Milwaukee. He's the architect of Wisconsin's Act 233, co-founder of Paradigm Shift, and coordinator of the Milwaukee Reentry Council. His nationally recognized work advances second chance opportunities and builds systems of shared accountability. Now, before we get started, I want to thank our event sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Spectrum News One, and our supporting sponsor is We Energies. I'd also like to thank our event partner, WisPolitics.com. WisPolitics.com partners with the Press Club for this luncheon as part of its ongoing event series in Milwaukee, and that's sponsored by HB Strategies, Medical College of Wisconsin, Spectrum, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and the Wisconsin Transportation Builders Association. Now I'd like to welcome our media panel. They are from over here, going this way, Devin Blake of the Neighborhood News Service, my colleague David Clarey from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and Adam Roberts, WTMJ 620 News. Now if you could, please welcome Mr. Adam Procell.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, thank you. I like things to be a little bit interactive, right? Nobody wants to just get talked at for a long period of time. And actually, we'll keep this relatively short. That way we can open up enough time for questions. And to that point, I'll give like a very cursory sort of explanation of who I am. I think the bio sort of painted a little bit of a picture, but I was not born in Wisconsin, and I'm an avid Green Bay Packer hater, so I'll make this as difficult as possible so I can maybe just even see myself out right now if you want to kick me out. I'm a Colorado native, and I was a really, really good kid growing up, and there's reasons why I'm kind of dropping a couple of these breadcrumbs because there's some questions that I hope will get asked later that will kind of give you a peeling back of the curtain, so to speak. And at the age of 14, my best friend was shot in the head and killed. And I think that took me on a path that I didn't expect, and there's no excuses for my actions. I think a lot of you know that I spent a quarter of a century in prison for the most heinous act that a human being can be a part of, and I do take full responsibility for those actions. I'm not proud of them. I think it gives me an opportunity to understand violence from a different lens, a different perspective. And I would end up spending a quarter of a century in the Wisconsin prison system. And obviously, being paroled in 2018, a lot of people have seen the process on hiring me, and I think that's where I hope the conversation goes. And again, if it doesn't, completely up to you guys and up to the media. But I just want to say, like, let's be honest and ask some questions that maybe you were maybe uncomfortable. I'm not going to tell you I don't feel comfortable answering any question. And what I mean by that is there's some things that I didn't expect. And that's every room I walk into now, everybody pretty much knows the worst thing I've ever done as a human being. And I think that's sort of unexpected. And I think there's good things, obviously, or oddly that come from that. And there's bad things. And from a psychological standpoint, like, lean into that. Ask me about that. If you want to. If you don't care, that's fine as well. But I'm trying to explore some of this as well because just the rawness of, like, even this room, right? I walked in, it was very pleasant, but it's somewhere in the back of my mind, it's like, man, the worst thing I've ever done as a human being. I'm sure, like, you've all done whatever it is that you consider the worst thing that you've ever done. And imagine if everybody knew that. In every room, from the drive-thru at Burger King to City Hall to right now, right? And so let's get into something that you may never even think about, because I want to answer any question that I possibly can to you guys as well. I think never being a part of this particular engagement, I don't know what the normal occurrence is, but feel free to ask me anything you can possibly think of, because I think it's going to come later. So at any point, I will never tell you I don't feel comfortable answering that. And to that point, I think I'll just go ahead and turn it over to the media panel, and I'll pull up a chair because it feels very weird me standing and speaking and everybody else is seated, so I'm just a normal guy. So thank you. That is an aggressive microphone.
All right, well, from a fellow Adam to another Adam, good afternoon.
Adam squared.
And thanks again for agreeing to take part in this today. So I wanted to begin, you mentioned in your introduction that process that got you to where you are now the director of this office. Walk me through how you first learned that your name behind the scenes was being included, because it's been well documented you were not one of the 3 finalists that went through that process. At what point did it become clear that I am the person that the mayor wants to take on this position?
Yes, it happened via a phone call from the mayor's office, probably 2 weeks or so before the announcement was made. And I don't know if I should face this way or face you. Feels like I'm in a weird spot. Wherever you want. I'm going to step back a little bit. Rotate. Okay. And I was given a call, and it was stated to me that based on a lot of the work that I had done in my past, I think it was noted the Act 233 writing, the collaborative efforts for the Reentry Council, a lot of the basis of who I am is collaborative in nature. And a lot of the relationships that I had built with the fire department, the police department, the sheriff's department, the court system, the district attorney's office, I'd spent a lot of time cultivating relationships from not only the top down, but bottom up. And the onus of who I am as a human is not one single one of us can do this on our own. We're sort of forced, if we want to live in this ecosystem of getting to a better, safer place, we have to work together. And so they're like, no pressure whatsoever, just think about it, talk to your loved ones, talk to your family, and if you're interested, come down to City Hall and we'll have some further discussions. And obviously, I did take them up on it, and people, and I don't want to put a question in your mouth, but people say, well, if you wanted the job, why didn't you apply like everybody else? And to be quite honest, I was in the trenches doing the work. And I saw it, and I was keeping an eye on it. And I knew one of the individuals that was running from just different events that I had been in. The other 2, I had no understanding, or I hadn't met them before. But the reason to answer my own question, I guess, when the mayor of the city that you live in reaches out to you and says, based on who you are as a person, based on the network that you have, based on what we've done together in the past, we feel that you would be in a good position to help make our community safer. And I pay taxes in this city, right? I look up to these elected officials, and knowing that at one point I made the community as unsafe as possible, I look forward to trying to reverse that and help the community become safer. So I feel it's my responsibility as a citizen of this city to accept.
Hey, Adam. Good to see you.
You as well.
I wanted to start off kind of generally here to help kind of table set the conversation about what your work is. Can you kind of explain to us, how the Office of Community Wellness and Safety does try to improve community safety? And maybe we could look at it from the lens, obviously in October, we had a bad week there where, shootings spiked. Kind of how did your office approach that, and what did that work actually look like?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues that I feel I get asked the most and spend the most time on is, what do you do? And for those that are familiar with my office and the history of it, the Office of Community Wellness and Safety is a relatively new name. It used to be the Office of Violence Prevention, and there was a lot of reasons why that name was changed. Because if you have the title of the Office of Violence Prevention, it comes with certain connotations. And to your point of October, the amount of media requests that reach out and say, what are you doing about the shootings? And it's like, well, if I answer every single question on what happened at this shooting last Tuesday, it's putting us in a position where we're painting an inaccurate sort of picture of what our office does. And what I mean by that is, when they changed the name to the Office of Community Wellness and Safety, we went from just strictly trying to prevent violence from occurring to how do we create, and this is sort of the direction I'm taking this office, how do we create the best ecosystem for all the system partners to work collaboratively together? Because people may not think about it in this way, but when I think of a a 4-year-old that doesn't have access to good food. And if I address that, to me, that is violence prevention. And people don't necessarily put those two things together, but there's so many things that, in my opinion, I would think, in the opinion of a lot of others, we have to start looking at this as a public health crisis. And there's so many different areas, rather than just being reactive after a shooting or after a homicide or after a stabbing, that if we want to prevent those, we have to spend much more resources on the front end, early access to education, trying to connect kids to mentorship, addressing the home life. Like, all those things, to me, in my opinion, are violence prevention efforts. And so we're kind of expanding out of just addressing shootings, but because people think that's what we do, most importantly. And you ask about a couple weeks ago when there is so many people shot. And what people don't see or don't understand is, let's say a shooting comes in, we get a referral from the police department, and we get a referral from the police department if they feel there's going to be a high chance of retaliation. So violence prevention, sort of in nature, is trying to prevent retaliatory attacks. So a lot of our street outreach teams, they have contacts in the community. So if a shooting happens, for instance, they'll immediately start to connect with the family or friends, associates of those who have been shot, whether that's in Freighter Hospital, whether that's at a vigil, whether it's at a funeral, because we attend all those places. And because we have relationships built up with those that are in the community, we can sort of say, hey, like, what's going on? What's fueling and it seems like common sense, but you have to start to build this rapport. And if you have a rapport, you can start to talk people back from wanting to retaliate. So during a lot of these shootings, there was some gang violence, there were some gang threats. So our team is out there interacting with those that are connected to, trying to combat those crimes from escalating even further.
Hey, Adam, how's it going?
Good.
Related to kind of the scope of your office and the ways in which you want to measure success of your office, I wonder if you can talk about, in what ways can the Office of Community Wellness and Safety contribute to, increased literacy or reduced child poverty? Like what's, people talk about silos all the time, silos in government, silos in the nonprofit world. What silos have you observed in this role that impede things like child literacy and child poverty and stuff like that?
I think a very narrow lanes on stopping the shootings, right? And I think if you're just focused on that, and I'm trying not to move to make this pop, so I'm trying to stand very still, so I apologize for any feedback. But I think there's been a very narrow lanes on just the violence aspect in general, which again is very reactory. And I get it, because most of our funding is tied up in the street outreach, in the violence prevention efforts. And I'm in a sort of a weird position because I came in after our budget for 2026 was already written. And so I don't get to control anything for 2026. Like, I wasn't a part of any of those conversations, and so much of that, funding is from ARPA, so COVID funding, which is sunsetting, but a lot of our outreach efforts are fully funded or mostly funded by ARPA funds. And so it's sort of difficult coming into, I know lame duck isn't technically the right term, but it feels almost like a lame duck director, because I have to status quo our efforts, even though, again, I want to sort of expand and almost zoom out of just violence prevention from a reactionary standpoint to focusing on, as a city department, I have access to Milwaukee Public Schools, and I've met with superintendent, and she's very, very interested in, she made a statement to me. She was like, my kids are getting shot, and I'm going to do what I feel needs to be done, and if people have issues with some of my decisions, like, it's not that I don't care, but like, at the end of the day, my kids are getting shot. So I have to start looking at new, innovative ways to keep my kids safe. And I think there's been a connection also, or a lack of a connection, for instance, from my wheelhouse, and that's reentry. Like, how does the Office of Community Wellness and Safety have really no touch point to the reentry population? I feel that, somebody at 35 doesn't wake up in the morning and be like, you know what, I'm gonna, at 35, go out and make the community less safe today and reoffend. And so engaging with the broader reentry population, it's because if we can provide those individuals with opportunities to lead lifestyles other than what they led yesterday, by default, that makes our community safer. So I feel like this position gives me a touch point to different places that may not have been touched in the past. And I can sort of, based on what I've done in the past, and I don't know why God has given me the opportunity, or everybody has their pros and their cons, their gifts and their curses, right? I feel mine is bringing people together.
So then on that note of bringing people together, your office, based just down the street here, City Hall, and that means you're going to have to be working with the people who work there when it comes to legislation and things like that. Everything's got to go through the Common Council and all of those annals. I know in the days immediately following your announcement, there was a little bit of, it was verbally skepticism at the decision. I believe David's outlet reported Alderman Bob Bauman indicated he never even had heard of you before. So that kind of feels like it's setting that precedent of, okay, who's this guy coming in and telling us what to do after the selection process? But as you've alluded to before, you're no stranger to working in the political realm with Act 233. So two-part question. One, have you taken Alderman Bauman out to lunch yet? And then as a follow-up, how will you handle that gridlock that can come with working through channels like the Common Council to put in action things that you want to see done?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And I would say there was an underestimation of how sort of tense it was after the mayor appointed me. And so to that point, I think as soon as I got my email account, I emailed every single alder and introduced myself and asked to meet with them individually, one-on-one, and have not met with Bauman yet, but I did email him to ask, but I've met with a fair number. I've also started to monthly, or as soon as the data is given to me, provide them with reports of most of our initiatives. And I think they've respected that. If there's an incident in a particular alder's district, let's say there's a trick-or-treating event. I'm trying to think of the most recent thing. And if it happens to be in their district and we're going to have a coordinated response from some of our Promise Keepers, some of our critical response team, our Forum for Life members, letting the alders know ahead of time, hey, just to let you know we're going to be here. This is what we're trying to do. Here's your point of contact. Here's their phone number. So if something were to happen, hopefully it doesn't, on the scene, this is how we can sort of work together. I think they've appreciated that. The incident with Elijah Wilkes that was shot on, was it on Mill Road? We were actually doing an event in Alderwoman Taylor's district and apprising her in real time of our outreach efforts. I think she respected that. I've gone on a number of walks with alders, and so I've really just tried to engage with them. And I understand, right? Like if you've never heard of me, I can't change that. And I'm not trying to come in and say I have all the answers. I will, in fact, tell you the opposite. I don't have all the answers. I don't feel anybody does. But I feel that since I've taken on this role, with my actions, I've shown up, said, hey, I'm trying to present you with all the information that I have, and I think that's been a barrier from our office in the past. At least what's been told to me is a lack of transparency, and I'm trying to say, hey, for better or worse, I'm pulling back the curtain, like good, bad, and the ugly. This is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is what I feel is ineffective, this is what I would like to go, or this is where I would like to go. And at least to my knowledge, it seems like that relationship is being repaired, and obviously you can't win over everybody over every day, and I feel though that they're not going away, and as long as I'm in this role, it is my job to find a way to effectively communicate with them and address concerns that they have and get grilled at budget hearings, which I have, and which is that's tough to get grilled, especially when you don't necessarily know what your budget is because you didn't write your budget. And so, but they've actually been pretty helpful, I would say. So I'm actually appreciative of a lot of our interactions.
I wanted to ask you about something we've talked about in the past is kind of and you speak for yourself obviously, but you've told me about a desire to get away from being a direct service provider. I think that fits into kind of the lens of what you were saying earlier about kind of broadening the scope of your office. But I guess I wanted to have you expound on that a little bit here. I think about like the CVI work you've mentioned with like the critical response team, obviously work that has been done in other cities in the country and like been proven to be successful. There's assessments that have been done here showing it's successful as well. So kind of take us into why that's a desire of yours to kind of step out of that. And if I'm misunderstanding too, obviously correct.
Yeah, and so the reason I want to, and a lot of what we do isn't direct service providing anyways, but a lot of people I think have a misunderstanding of that. Like even our critical response team, they're looked at as our team, but it's through a subcontractor. And a lot of people I think have a misunderstanding for reasons, I guess I don't know, and it's not important. But to answer your question, earlier I said so much of our funding comes from ARPA, the American Rescue Act. And with that funding sunsetting, we have to find different ways of ensuring this work continues. And to do that without this magic bullet of, hey, I have $3 million right here for this work, we have to start leveraging what each organization has. And so if we have $1 million, because I think people would be shocked if they knew what our budget is. And so whatever dollar amount that we have, we can either give it to this organization that maybe has 3 employees that are doing phenomenal things, or we give it to an organization that's a collective of 9 different organizations. So, and I hate to use it as a return on investment, but if we only have a finite amount of funds, we have to start investing in coalitions and collaborations, because if we invest in just one organization, it may help that, and that may help 3 people, which those 3 people do matter. But again, if we're a city department, we only have X amount of funds. Alternatively, if we invest in a coalition that has 9 organizations, that has 500 youth coming through that can all be helped, to me, that's much more of a reason to invest in the coalition. And again, that's not taking anything away from the other organization. And if we had infinite amounts of funds, then I want to invest, bless you, I would want to invest in them, invest in the coalitions. But again, I think people would be shocked to understand like how little funding that we have. And with that, we have to invest in what kind of reaches out the most.
Adam, you mentioned the bias or the being surprised at some of the reaction to your appointment or your hiring as director. Is that like a personal kind of experience? Well, is it limited to how you felt personally, or does that bias affect the work you're able to do?
Ooh, that's tough. I would say both. And I think this opens up another line of thoughts and questions on, we talk about America being the land of second chances, and I know there's some reentry partners in here that like that's all they do is work to try to provide those who have made mistakes with real second chances. And I think a lot of us think we are open to that, but I think my appointment was a good almost litmus test of like, are we ready to have somebody at this level who has a very bad, well, from a crime standpoint, very bad. I don't have a lengthy criminal record, but the crime itself was the worst possible. Are we ready for somebody with that background to be in this position? And I would say that individually, when I go places, the interpersonal reactions or interactions are very positive. I've done what I've been advised not to do, and that's read the comments from the news stories, and those are brutal. I mean, those are absolutely brutal. I mean, from being literally Satan to a piece of, things that I don't feel comfortable saying. And I get it. There's people that are always going to criticize and have opinions. And I think what's been tough, though, and I can feel the emotion in myself as I'm about to say this, it's not that those things necessarily hurt my feelings, but these are all the things that I've said to the mirror. Like, I've really had a difficult time dealing with guilt. When you're a part of something as atrocious as I was, and you thoroughly regret it, and you spent a lot of time trying to repair and making the community safer, when you see a lot of these
he doesn't deserve this. He'll never be the same. He should be in prison for the rest of his life. Like, that's what I said to the mirror. And it brings a lot of these emotions back. And I'll be honest with you guys. To be a kid, so I was 15 when I went to the adult prison system, and I was 5 foot 100 pounds. I couldn't fight my way out of anything. And so I just shut off all my emotions to survive being a kid in prison, which, blessing and a curse, I survived. But then, like, I get accused of being a robot, and it comes into like my relationships. Like, there's no emotion there. In the years since I've gotten out, I've tried to work on that. But now that I've been in this role, dealing with that guilt again, I find that I'm pushing my emotions back down, because every single siren that I hear, like every single siren I hear, I'm like, did somebody just get shot? My actions cause a siren like that. And so it's been really, really tough to try to juggle. I feel like I understand violence on a level that a lot hopefully don't, and I feel that gives me insight, doesn't give me all the answers. But then on the other end of the spectrum, the weight of two different weights. If I fail, every formerly incarcerated person that comes behind me might not get the chance that I got. And then two, every siren that I hear, I feel like that's the harm that I inflicted upon this community. It just builds and builds.
One quick follow-up. You were 16, right, when you were sentenced?
15.
15. What could 15-year-old Adam have used to prevent that?
Yeah, that's the question that I've asked myself probably 900 times. And it's tough because faith is the most important thing in my life. And so when I kind of reverse engineer that question, I almost feel like it was my destiny. And I don't know if there's anything, because this is the plan God had for me. But if I try to remove that and just force myself to give you an answer, to me, there's really only two things, and they sort of coincide with one another. That's time and proximity to somebody who is instilling positive values in me. And what I mean by that is, I grew up with my father, and he did instill those values into me. And in no way, shape, or form am I disparaging my mom or my grandmother. But when my best friend was killed and I moved away from my father, that's when I really just, and my mom, I loved her, but I don't feel like I had that structure that I needed, and that positive male role figure. I had it, yes, most of my childhood, and I've reverted back now to a lot of those values he's instilled in me, and I feel when I look in the mirror now, I see my father. But when I needed him, and this is in no way blaming him, when I needed him the most on the day-to-day basis of, hey, what are you doing, you dummy? Like, and I don't mean like in a disrespectful way, but in that, because he's never disrespected me. But like, think better. Like, I didn't teach you to be like, I didn't raise you to act like this. And I think teens, especially in the realm of social media, or everything is now. Like, if you don't have somebody leading into your life every single day with that positive influence, things can go badly so quickly.
So to dig in a little bit, I wanted to ask, and you've said over and over again that you want the uncomfortable questions because we can only grow if we face those uncomfortable truths. Take me inside the mind of someone who is drawn to end someone's life. What is happening in someone's brain in that moment where they make that decision, I'm going to kill someone, and utilizing that information and the lived experience you have, how can then we use that knowledge to attack violence at the root and try to prevent more homicides from happening?
Well, you weren't lying about a tough, uncomfortable question. And thank you. And I think that's as uncomfortable as it is for me, because every single time I'm asked that or I look in that, I'm immediately transported back to those moments when I set a course of action, right? And which begs, and I'll plant another question on, is somebody who has done what I've done right for this role? And I'm asking myself that, right? Because of, as I'm going out, I don't feel it is sustainable how I'm approaching this, because I am taking all this on. to answer those questions, right? And not just here, but in the priorities that I'm doing, the shape of my office, the direction of my office. I don't know the answer to that. Like, I'm running myself into the ground out of guilt. And so just an auxiliary question is, I don't know if someone like me is the right person, just oddly as that may sound. But to answer your question, I feel once you get to the point where, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Robert, to his family, but to answer your question, if you have somebody with their gun in their hand and they're pulling a trigger, or even a couple moments before then, you've already lost the battle, right? Like, you're set on a course of action. You have to start, which is why I so desperately want to start focusing on the front end at a much earlier age, when people think violence prevention should be even a topic of conversation. To your point on some of your earlier questions, and that's because, I'll just speak for myself. On September 26, 1995, I was in the mindset of, and you can choose to, I feel like I've been very honest, you can choose to believe me or not. I didn't have the mindset to take somebody's life. I had the mindset of, I want to impress this older gang member that was asking me to do things that I knew were wrong. I'm not trying to say that I didn't know. And people say a juvenile's brain isn't, or the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the age of 25. Be that as it may, I knew right from wrong. But I so desperately wanted to impress these older individuals that I sort of stuffed down my knowledge of what's right and what's wrong, because I had one priority, and that's to earn my stripes, as they say, impress this older individual, rise up the ranks of the gang, get the pretty girls, get the money, because that's the status that I saw. And as a young, impressionable 14-year-old, again, no excuse whatsoever, I'm just giving you an honest insight into my mentality. I don't know that there's anything that could be said. Let me take a step back. I think you would have had to have gone back at least a year and started addressing my mindset then. As soon as I started to connect with those groups, that's when you have to intervene. Because after that, I was already on, I'm not trying to hear anything positive in my life. Like, and I don't know if it's because I was suppressing my best friend being killed, or I was so impressionable just due to my age, or I wanted to impress the older crowd so much. I don't know that it even necessarily matters. You would have had to have gone back at least a year to sort of get in my mind, if that makes any sense.
So I guess let's talk about like that idea specifically there, like going back at least a year. Now, in your role, how can your office specifically, whether it's a new program you were to implement or just like the work that you guys do, like how does your office kind of try to get in, those early interventions essentially to prevent something from happening?
Yeah, so we have some of our folks that go into Washington High School. They do assessment tests. They have individuals interact with them, ask them what's going on in their life, try to provide resources to them. We have a plethora of community events that we're part of, from, again, I know it may sound silly, but like trick-or-treating events where we're trying to help family members get the resources that they need. And so I think there's a plethora of things that we do, offering clinician help, so people who have been impacted by violence, not necessarily by themselves, but in their household, been witness to it, offering psychological therapeutic responses to that. Because I think there's a phrase that most people know, hurt people. And so if we think about prevention, if somebody's been impacted by violence at a young age and that isn't addressed, the odds of them hurting somebody in the future, I think, greatly increase. And so that's one of our, I hate to hierarchical what we do in order of importance, but addressing the mental health aspect of seeing some of this violence, I think, is one of the most important things that we do. But that's a good example of that. What we're doing there is coming from what's called a recast grant. It's a federal grant. It's a 5-year, $1 million a year grant. And now, due to what's happening on the federal level, that grant for next year hasn't even been released yet. And normally at this point in the year, it would have been. And that's like that's literally our biggest grant. So if that's not even put out because of, and again, I'm not getting into the nature of politics from that landscape, but if it's not there, like that is a huge part of what we do that we just don't have the capability to fund anymore.
Just, are you referring to the federal shutdown? Is that allowing those the funds to be
No,
released?
well, that's a part of it, like the individual. So that's this part of it is we have these monthly updates with the federal government, and we got an auto email response. They're not in the office, so we can't even invoice and things of that nature. So that's being affected, but no, philosophically, I think some things from the federal government are dictating what grants are becoming available next year.
So then, how do you avoid the trouble or the problem of mission creep, or construing the work of your office according to whatever funding you can get?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. There's no easy answers. I think that's been a big part of, in some of the interviews that were interviewing for this job prior to me taking it, how are you going to fund, how are you going to resource? And nobody really has the answer. And that's why I definitely am trying to shift to collaborative, because the city, I mean, we can only give what we are budgeted for, and obviously everybody's seen in the news, the police, they want a new contract, the fire department, they need new fire trucks, so everybody's vying for, and to be quite honest, there's a lot of people that feel that what we do is nothing but a bunch of guys with orange t-shirts going to conferences, right? And you mentioned earlier, but if you look at St. Louis, you look at Baltimore, and these drastic reduction in homicides and shootings, I mean, drastic, because of violence prevention efforts. At some point, and Milwaukee is the only sort of area that we're seeing a lot of reduction in the shootings. I think, and this is what you don't necessarily see, and no offense to the media here, right? But crime, for the most part, is overwhelmingly down from this point last year. Like, shootings are down 17 or 19% last week. Homicides are up 7%, which obviously, to me, that's the worst one. But that 7% increase is still more than what a lot of these other cities who are fully funding violence prevention efforts. I think that's where I'm trying to bring this office. And that's why I'm going to reach out to national partners, have been conversing with national partners. The woman in Baltimore that created Brandon Scott's plan that reduced those homicides by such a great margin, she's helping me understand how to do that better.
So what sort of budget would you have if you had a magic wand?
So there's actually and I can try to find you the link, but there's an algorithm, and they say based on our city size, which I'm sure people will gasp, but they say a city of our size should have about a $33 million budget to do some of these, if you type in all the different metrics that are above my pay grade. But this is like on a national level. Obviously, we'll never.
What is it for?
What, my budget?
Yeah.
So, and this is where that gets tricky. So we have about, from the tax levy, one account for $750,000 that goes to our 4 and 4 Life street team, so the violence interrupters. We have about another $200,000 that goes to our domestic violence commission, which is, if you want to know bad trends, 20% of the homicides in Milwaukee this year are domestic violence related, 20%. That is and those are just the reported numbers. I think everybody in this space knows that DV is always underreported, so if the reported numbers are 20%, we have to find a way to start to address, and that's one of the most volatile, troubling, tough areas. And so we have about another $1.3 million that are ARPA funds that'll sunset. So to me, that's like phantom budget. And when I say phantom budget, last year our budget, or this year, is about $6 million. But I would say 85% of it is all ARPA funds. So when you say like our budget, it's sort of a mirage. On a normal year, our budget is very, very small.
Shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to go back to a comment that you made to, I believe it was the Public Health and Safety Committee, when you were talking about trying to target those younger members of our city, who getting to them before those thoughts of violence get into them. And you had mentioned that people need money, and if they can't get it, they're going to get it. If they can't get it legally, they're going to get it some other way. And we talk about wanting to build economic opportunities, jobs, things like that. Not just here downtown where we see a lot of development, we see a lot of focus when it comes to that regard, maybe not so much in our neighborhoods. And some people will say, well, you have to build from downtown and then the wealth spreads out. But I think if you ask some people who live in our neighborhoods that are most susceptible to violence, they'd say, okay, well, when is that opportunity coming? So does that argument of we need to build up the center of our city to spread the wealth out, does that hold weight, or is that a little bit misleading?
It's tough. And ironically, I was on a meeting about 2 hours ago on some of the issues that have been going on Brady Street and Water Street. And from a violence intervention side of things, because we get asked to send some of our people down to Brady Street, to Water Street, which I get it, right? Especially in the last 2 years, there's been a growing number of shootings that have happened downtown. So you almost have to separate this. From a optics standpoint, any violence that happens downtown is obviously going to get much more press, right? And the pushback on our side of things is we have very few people. I mean, the number of violence interrupters that we have is staggeringly low. And if we take people and bring them to Water Street out of a 53206, out of a 53208, places where these shootings are happening daily, and I'm not saying any shooting that doesn't happen anywhere isn't of immediate importance, right? But if we only have 20 people and there's so many shootings in places not here, even though optically, if your downtown doesn't look safe, I would agree that that does start to create a narrative of this city is not safe. Conversely, if you have, I'll take a step back. I was at the Gun Violence Summit a few weeks ago, and I was leading a panel with high schoolers. And this is heartbreaking. There's probably 70 high schoolers from 5 different high schools. I said, raise your hand if you've heard gunshots in the last week. 98% of those kids raised their hands. And it's like, this is what these kids are facing every single day. And so it gets tough because you go back to that, how many resources, how many people do you have? Do you send them to where a shooting happens that, yeah, in the long run, if your city downtown isn't safe, pushes the businesses out? Or every single day I don't feel safe, what do we do now today? Because my kid doesn't feel safe going to the store. And so you sort of have to just weigh it and try to apply resources. Like on Halloween, I was on Brady Street in my suit. I don't drink, so it wasn't that. But just helping some of our team, taking a look at it, what it does look like to see hundreds and hundreds of underage kids at 1 a.m. out on Water Street, knowing that there's not enough police to do something about that when a crowd gets to that size. And so it's again, it all goes back to trying to prevent, because once you're in that, it becomes so hard to manage. And so that's why, again, we always want to react to something. And we always say we don't have the funds to invest on the front end, but if we don't invest on the front end, it becomes unmanageable on the back end. And then now it's sort of, there are no easy answers. There just isn't, because we've set ourselves on a course of this will not make sense. We will now reap what we sow because we chose not to invest when we know we should have on the front end. And so I feel that's almost where we're at right now.
I wanted to ask you about something a bit more recent. With the city budget amendments went through last week or the week before. One of those that was passed would move your office out of the Department of Administration, the mayor's office, and move it into its own department. I understand the mayor still has to make a decision on his approach to that amendment, but I did want to get your thoughts on what's your opinion of that, and how do you feel about potentially that occurring?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, it's actually the elephant in the room. Most people think that I report to the mayor. I don't. So I'm actually under the Department of Administration, and so I'm a few layers down below. And the amendment that he's referring to would take us out of the Department of Administration, create a whole new department. My position would then become a cabinet level position, like DPW, or anything like that. And so then I would have to be confirmed by, well, they don't know if I'm grandfathered in, or will I have to be confirmed by the Common Council. So now they would get their chance to, if they don't like me, if they don't like what I've done, in a couple of weeks I theoretically couldn't have a job. And so I have to approach it with, I hope I've shown them thus far that I'm not what maybe they perceived someone in my position to be, or with my background is. I know that people who are unfortunately going to get shot tomorrow, or some little kid that doesn't feel safe today, I have to show up right now. So I can't worry about what they're going to do. I can't worry about what the mayor does, whether he vetoes, because he has an opportunity to veto. There's so many unknowns. But the sort of scary aspect is, as it stands now, the Common Council did vote to remove me beginning in 2026. The troubling part of that is the budget for 2026 is already complete. So essentially we'd have an entire department with zero budget for 2026. So it's a really big elephant in the room that if I put too much time and effort into it, it'll just bog you down. So I just have to just keep showing up, address what I can now, and let the powers that be determine what that looks like. And I'll give every single effort that I have until they tell me either, yes, you're confirmed, if that process is, or if they say, you know what, we feel that there is somebody better, more capable, then I have to respect that as well. And then I'll be asking one of you, Karen, I'll ask you for a job at my way out. So, thank you.
But I guess to be clear, you don't exactly know yet if they would have to reconfirm you. You know, it's still a little murky, right?
Very murky.
Yeah.
Going back to the issue of like early intervention and prevention, and specifically with MPS, obviously that would involve MPS and MPS students. And I wanted to know what your opinion is on the SRO program. I've heard from current students and former youth advisors for violence-free zones that they have found that the SROs are undermining the ability for youth advisors to prevent violence, because it is all based on trust and those trusting relationships between students and youth advisors, and students don't feel that same level of trust from MPD officers. And in addition to other criticisms about the way that program has been rolled out, do you find merit in the argument that SROs could potentially be undermining other violence prevention efforts?
I guess I'd have to learn more. I think it'd be improper for me to speak to whether they are or not. I've seen some just social media reports of things of that nature. How accurate they are, I don't know. I'm not in there. I know some of the officers that are in those schools are some really, really good officers. But again, I don't have enough information to know whether or not that is the case. I do know, and again, it goes back to that sort of dual. If that is true, on the other end of the spectrum, MPS calls MPD, I don't know how many hundreds of times each year. So it's like they themselves are reaching out to. So how do you manage that? I would understand if they're not reaching out to MPD at all, but they're reaching out so many times asking MPD for help.
Thank you for those great questions from our journalists. We'd like to spend the next few minutes for questions from the audience, for anybody who has any for our guest. Marilyn.
I'm interested in knowing how you know, or how will you know, that you are making progress? How do you think that you can measure that in a way to communicate to the community as you go through this new role for yourself?
Sure. And so I'll give the non-PC answer of the easy, lazy metric is how many people got shot this year and how many people got shot and did not survive, right? The two stats, the two metrics that lead every headline are non-fatal shootings and homicides. And at the end of the day, if those go down on some level, sure, to me that shows that you're succeeding. And I say the word lazy because to me it's so much more nuanced. As a sort of tangential example, the lane that I come from, reentry, people look at success as what is the recidivism rate? But you're judging positive based on a negative, as opposed to, like, is somebody thriving? Not just somebody, one, what is your definition of recidivism? Is it reincarceration? Is it rearrest? Is it a parole violation? That's not even clear. But has somebody held a job? Do they have a better relationship with their family? Have they had stable housing for the longest time in their life? Like, if we can start, and it's harder to measure those things, but until we do, I feel using a negative to judge a positive is almost sort of oxymoronish. And so I think there are things that we can do. And again, going back just to the violence aspect, have you guys heard of promise zones? So it's sort of 4 areas with a 5th up in the woodlands where we sort of direct most of our efforts. And if you look at the data from the last few years, the initial promise zones, they're hotspots, micro hotspots of crime, a lot of violence. They have almost all shifted out of the promise zones, which would show that the efforts that we are employing in these communities is being effective. I'm now trying to change those promise zones because to me they're almost, well, not almost, they are outdated. And if you start to look at, again, with the limited resources that we have, my plan is to start having micro hotspots of the most violent areas, like the highest concentrated areas of non-fatal shootings and homicides. Especially if we have very little funding, those are the 2 things that we do, unfortunately, have to address most prevalently. And you can look at, you create a boundary and you use whatever data source that you want. I use VRFAST or Medical College of Wisconsin. We have an epidemiologist that looks at with the MPD's data in real time. How many incidents from that area were called for violent issues? ShotSpotter, anybody heard of ShotSpotter? Like, how many of those are reported within that area? How many emergency room visits from that particular area zip code for violent offenses or violent incidents were reported to whatever trauma center? So there's ways you can measure on top of, I would argue, like, did early childhood enrollment in that same area go up? If there's a school, high school in that area, did fights go down? Like, there's so many things that I feel that we could measure on the positive side of things, not just the negative. But I get, if no disrespect, right? But if it bleeds, it leads. That's sort of how we have to couple long-term success, and if we don't show the bleed, it leads success, you get pushed out, so you can't even address the long-term. So,
Ma'am?
I have a question. You mentioned earlier that your office is working with Washington High School. Do you have plans to work with middle school?
the younger we can get to, 100%. To me, that's the area we need to go. High school, again, my crime occurred 3 days after I turned 15. I started Pulaski High School. I think I was there for 2 weeks. And when I said you'd have to go back at least a year, you have to go back then at least to middle school. And so we have to find ways to get to the youth earlier and earlier. So 100%, yes.
What about mental health? Do you have plans to address the mental health issue that school-aged children are dealing with?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big elephant in the room issues, and that's where I was describing that grant that we have that might unfortunately go away next year. So much of that goes to the mental health support to our youth. They're the ones who do run the program that's in Washington High School, and that's why we have to find ways to, because I feel people just don't wake up and become criminals, right? You know, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with ACEs and sort of what's happening in one's life growing up. If we don't find ways to unpack that, bad stuff happens. It's common sense, so we have to find ways to address that better.
I just had, you mentioned that one of the ways, the metrics that you would look at is how many people got shot, how many people died from that shot. So guns seem to be involved with this. And I know that one of the arguments about gun control is bad guys are going to get guns whether you try to restrict access or not. So can you go back to 1995? And how easy was it for you to get a gun then as opposed to getting a gun now? And would gun control issues help your office try to reduce some of these efforts, or are bad guys just going to get guns if they want guns?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I can't speak to how I haven't this week tried to go get an illegal firearm, contrary to popular belief. So I can't attest to how difficult it is. I would say based on the prevalence of guns, I'd have to imagine it's pretty easy to get one. We're working with, actually,
Was it easy for you to gain access to a gun at the age of 15?
yes, unnervingly so. And I don't know if it was because I was just so young and it was just provided to me by the older members of the gang. And I think it's different in different situations. And now I think one of the scary things that we're seeing are ghost guns, or guns that you can, as crazy as it sounds, print, 3D print, that are untraceable. And I think that's a definite area of concern. And I know the police department is really working on that. And the numbers, if you look at how many ghost guns have been found and how that's increasing in a very short period of time, that's terrifying. And when you get into gun control, and I'm trying to stay out of the political foray of that, you have to almost look at it from so many different angles. And if you look at a state's law, like Illinois has some of the toughest gun laws in the country, right? And the highest gun violence. So you're like, And it was kind of brought to me that you have to start looking at other states. So don't just look at Illinois or look at Wisconsin. What are the states surrounding that state? What are their gun laws? And are those guns being brought across the border? Brazil, I was visiting their criminal justice system earlier this year, and Brazil has some of the highest gun violence in this world. And yet you can't even really own a gun in Brazil. So like, well, how does that work? And it was cross-border, people bringing guns across the border. And so I think we always look at what is my state doing, but you never hear about what are the states that are nearest to me, what are they doing, because that also impacts. So I think it's a coordinated effort. I think that if we just say tougher gun laws make it harder for bad guys to get guns, I think that's also lazy. It's much more nuanced, and we have to look at it from different perspectives.
I think we have time for one more question if somebody wants to ask it.
It could be an easy one. You don't have to ask me all hard questions.
I'll ask a question. When you were earlier addressing the difficulty of the metrics to show effectiveness of your efforts, does that present then a challenge to obtain funding from elected officials? And then how do you overcome that challenge when you make the case to those folks?
For sure. And like a very easy example is, like, if you look out the window right now and I tell you a homicide didn't occur right there, like, how do you prove that? Like, how do you prove that? How many ships did a lighthouse prevent from hitting the shore? They just keep passing. You don't, unless you have a camera on every single ship that passes. Like, how do you prove that? But what you can start to do, and there's another county in some of their programs, they track really, really well the interactions they have with the youth. Once they engage with them, once they start to mentor them and just love, as silly as it sounds, just love on them, how few of them go back or commit crimes in the future. And I think that directly shows how effective this work can be and is. And it is just sort of extrapolating that onto a larger scale. And then with adults, if there's a shooting and someone who either got shot, who's had a long criminal history, typically you have to have a different mindset. This person is probably going to go retaliate. If he doesn't, to me, that's success, right? But not necessarily in the way people might think.
All right. Well, a round of applause for Adam and for our journalists who has some really great
Thank you,
questions, and for you for coming out. I just have a question for the group. How many people are at their first Newsmaker Luncheon? A couple of people, more than a couple of people. That's great to see. Thank you for coming. The Press Club always welcomes new members. You can go to our website and learn more about that. Our Press Club Endowment, which is separately operated, is always happy to take your donations. You can go to our website and learn about that as well. Thank you again, and thanks again to our sponsors, and we appreciate your presence here today. Thank you.